you, Professor. We'll now turn to member questions. I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Steve Moore, let me start with you. Chairman Powell recently said that the reason why consumers are angry about inflation is because of the increase in prices that occurred in 2021, 2022, and 2023. Or in other words, consumers are still feeling the higher prices generated from that inflation shock that several of you mentioned in your testimony. He stated, though, that as real incomes rise, which is a point you made, people will feel better over time. So I agree with that, and we don't want to rehash in here. Members of this committee, some on both sides of the aisle, but mostly on the Republican side of the aisle, in the fall of 2020 said, let's get back to business, take the foot off the gas of the monetary policy expansionism, and we did not support buying $6 trillion more in fiscal stimulus in the spring of 2021. We thought that was over the top vis-a-vis the pandemic and the recovery that we'd already witnessed due to what was a very V-shaped recovery. But you make a good point about real wage increases, and I think the big, beautiful bill signed into law last year speaks directly to, for seniors, for overtime, for tips, for taking the standard deduction, for doubling the child tax credit, produce some of that real wage increase. Can you reflect on how you see that coming to pass this year as Americans open up their notice from the IRS and they see a bigger refund this year? Can you reflect on what you think that could do for the macroeconomy this year?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mike.
Quick responses to that. Number one, you're quite right that the inflation, that the American people are angry about inflation, no question about it. They're very angry. Every poll shows that. They're angry about the cost of health care. They're angry about the cost of housing. My wife is angry about the cost of groceries. So it is at a boiling point. And the one thing I would sort of remind people is, 84% of that inflation that people are feeling today happened in 2021, 22, 23, and 24 under the previous president, and Trump is right. Inflation has actually come down. Now, we're not where we need to be.
Yep.
We're at about 2.7, 2.8%. We want to get that down to 2% or below. But the trend is good, and I think you heard from Secretary Bessent a week or two ago saying that the trend right now is headed to 2%. So that's the first most important point. The second thing I just want to quickly say is with respect to how can we bring housing prices, how can we make housing more affordable? And clearly, I think we could all agree that the mortgage interest rate is a big factor on whether people can buy a house. By the way, when I graduated from college, the mortgage interest rate was 17%. Nobody could afford to buy housing during those high inflationary times. What we're seeing now is that inflation is coming down, and that will make affordability better. But the point I'm making is the single most important factor in bringing down the 30-year mortgage rate is the inflation rate today and the expectation of inflation in the future. And that's something even President Trump, who I strongly support, he thinks that if the Fed lowers short-term rates, that's going to bring long-term rates down. That's not necessarily true. So let's concentrate on keeping prices stable and the dollar strong.
Appreciate that perspective. Mr. Brooks, let me turn to you on the subject of, I agree with that macro issue so much, and real wages does a lot to help on the affordability issue. We've put in our package we passed last night with 390 votes, we also freed up banks access to a greater stream of deposits, lowered and tailored compliance costs for our community banks because they make 60% of our 1 to 4 family construction loans across the country, banks under $10 billion. Can you talk a little bit with your executive branch experience about that importance of tailored regulations?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great question. The idea of treating relatively small banks the same as J.P. Morgan is something that we've had to grapple with since 2010 in the Dodd-Frank Act and in Basel III. Freeing community banks to do what they do best, which is to make loans based on a relationship basis to credits that they truly understand with borrowers in the community, whether that's purchase money mortgages or construction loans or whatever, is a really big deal. I think the legislative move that the committee made is terrific. I would go further and say, there needs to be oversight of the banking agencies to make sure that the supervisors inside of those agencies aren't penalizing banks for making the very loans that the committee wants them to make.
Right, and I do hope that under the leadership of, now that we have all the Trump administration agency heads confirmed, that they do that harmonized direct leadership management. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, and I yield back. I recognize the ranking member.